During a millionaire's wedding, my sister mocked my shoes, laughed at my gift, and called me country. Funny thing is, I'm 10x richer than everyone there. They have no idea who they're dealing with. But soon they'll learn the hard way. I, 29M, stood at the entrance of the Grandview estate, watching Bentleys and Ferraris pull up the circular driveway like some automotive parade. The wedding invitation had specified black tie optional. But looking at the guests stepping out in their designer everything, I realized optional meant mandatory here. I adjusted my simple black suit, the same one I'd worn to my college graduation 5 years ago, and checked my worn leather shoes one more time. My sister was marrying into the Morrison family, old money that traced back 3 generations in our city. The groom's father owned half the commercial real estate downtown, and their wedding guest list read like a who's who of local elite. What they didn't know was that the quiet guy in the cheap suit had just closed a deal that morning worth more than most of their annual incomes combined. I'd built my software company from my garage apartment, working 16-hour days while my family thought I was wasting my computer science degree. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now worth more than everyone at this wedding combined, yet I still drove my 10-year-old Honda and lived in the same modest apartment. Old habits, I suppose. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give them that. My sister looked radiant in her custom Vera Wang gown, and her new husband seemed genuinely happy. I sat in the back, watching our parents beam with pride in the front row. They'd always favored my sister, the social butterfly who married well, over their son who spent too much time with computers. During the cocktail hour, I grabbed a drink and found a quiet corner. The conversations around me revolved around yacht purchases, European vacations, and stock portfolios. I listened with amusement as people complained about their small 7-figure bonuses and debated whether to buy property in the Hamptons or Aspen. My sister approached with her new mother-in-law and a group of her friends. She looked me up and down with that familiar expression I remembered from childhood, the one that said I was somehow lacking. She commented on my appearance, asking if I'd gotten my suit from a thrift store. Her friends giggled as she pointed out my scuffed shoes, wondering aloud if I'd walked here from the farm. The mother-in-law joined in, suggesting that perhaps I wasn't familiar with proper wedding attire since I came from such a rustic background. I smiled and nodded, letting them have their fun. When my sister asked what I'd brought as a wedding gift, I handed her the small, wrapped box I'd been carrying. She opened it to find a simple picture frame with a photo of us as kids. Her face fell immediately. She held it up for her friends to see, explaining that this was exactly what she'd expected from her country brother who probably thought this was appropriate for a Morrison family wedding. The group erupted in laughter, with someone commenting that at least it was thoughtful, even if it wasn't from Tiffany's. I excused myself and walked away, their laughter following me across the terrace. But I wasn't hurt. I was calculating. The reception moved into the grand ballroom, where ice sculptures and floral arrangements that probably cost more than most people's cars decorated every surface. I found my assigned seat at table 12, far from the family tables, surrounded by distant relatives and family friends who barely acknowledged my presence. During dinner, I overheard conversations about business deals, investment opportunities, and charitable foundations. The Morrison family patriarch stood to give a speech about welcoming my sister into their family, emphasizing their values of success, ambition, and social responsibility. He mentioned their family foundation's work with underprivileged communities, drawing applause from the crowd. That's when my plan began to crystallize. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to my attorney, then to my accountant, and finally to my business partner. The conversations were brief but productive. By the time dessert was served, I had set several wheels in motion. Update 1. The next morning, I was back at my office by 6 a.m. My assistant had already prepared the documents I'd requested, and my legal team was standing by. The first phase of my plan was simple: research. Within hours, I had detailed financial information on every major family at that wedding. The Morrisons, despite their old money reputation, were actually leveraged to the hilt. Their real estate empire was built on debt, and several of their properties were underwater. My sister's new father-in-law had been quietly selling assets to maintain their lifestyle. More interesting was the discovery that their family foundation, the one they'd proudly discussed during the reception, was barely functional. They'd been using it primarily for tax benefits while doing minimal actual charitable work. I spent the next week making strategic investments. I quietly purchased several of the Morrisons' outstanding loans through shell companies. I also began buying up properties in their development pipeline, often outbidding them at the last minute through intermediaries. My sister called me that weekend, still high from her honeymoon in Tuscany. She thanked me again for the sweet picture frame, though her tone suggested she found it more amusing than touching. She mentioned that her new husband's family had been asking about me, wondering what I did for work. She told them I was in computers, but wasn't really sure of the details. I told her I was happy for her and left it at that. Update 2. 3 weeks after the wedding, the first domino fell. The Morrison family's flagship development project, a luxury shopping complex downtown, hit a snag when their primary investor pulled out. What they didn't know was that I had quietly convinced that investor to redirect their funds to one of my ventures instead. The local business journal ran a small article about the project's delays, mentioning cash flow concerns. I made sure to have that article delivered to my sister's new address. Meanwhile, I'd been working with a team of consultants to establish a legitimate charitable foundation. Unlike the Morrisons' paper tiger, mine would actually help people. I'd identified several underprivileged communities in our area that needed technology education and job training. Exactly the kind of work the Morrison Foundation claimed to do, but never actually implemented. My sister called me a few days later, sounding slightly less cheerful than usual. She mentioned that her husband's family was dealing with some business stress, but she was sure it would work out. She also asked, almost casually, if I knew anything about technology companies in the area that might be hiring. Her new brother-in-law was apparently looking for opportunities. I told her I'd keep my ears open. The second phase of my plan launched the following month. I announced my foundation's first major initiative, a $50 million program to provide technology education and job training in underserved communities. The announcement made the front page of the business section, complete with a photo of me at my office. I'd been careful to keep my personal wealth out of the public eye for years, but this announcement required some visibility. The article mentioned that I was the founder and CEO of a rapidly growing technology company, but didn't go into specifics about my net worth. My phone started ringing within hours. Update 3. My sister's call came that evening. Her voice was different, confused, almost suspicious. She'd seen the article and couldn't understand how her computer nerd brother had suddenly become a philanthropist with $50 million to throw around. I explained that I'd been working hard and had been fortunate with some business ventures. When she pressed for details, I told her I'd rather not discuss finances at family gatherings. It made people uncomfortable. She asked directly how much money I actually had. I told her that was a very personal question and changed the subject to ask about her honeymoon photos. The conversation ended awkwardly, but I could hear the wheels turning in her head. Over the next few weeks, I watched the Morrison family's situation deteriorate. Their development project officially stalled when they couldn't secure additional funding. 2 of their rental properties went into foreclosure proceedings. The father-in-law was forced to sell his yacht and downsize their summer home. Through my network, I learned that they were desperately seeking investors for their remaining projects. They'd even reached out to several technology companies, hoping to find someone interested in mixed-use developments that incorporated tech spaces. That's when I made my move. I had my attorney contact them directly, expressing interest in their portfolio on behalf of an unnamed client. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at their offices downtown. I arrived 15 minutes early, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my sister's wedding dress. My attorney and financial advisor flanked me as we were escorted to the Morrison family's conference room. The look on their faces when I walked in was worth every moment of planning. My sister's father-in-law actually did a double take, clearly recognizing me from the wedding but unable to process why I was sitting across from him in a business meeting. I let my attorney handle the introductions, explaining that I was interested in acquiring their entire portfolio of properties and development projects. The offer was generous, enough to pay off their debts and leave them with a modest profit, but it would effectively end their real estate empire. My sister's husband asked how I'd known about their financial situation. I told him that successful investors make it their business to identify opportunities, and their portfolio had come to my attention through my research. The elder Morrison asked about my background and qualifications. I handed him a folder containing my company's financial statements, a list of my current holdings, and documentation of my foundation's assets. His face went pale as he processed the numbers. I explained that I wasn't just interested in their properties. I wanted to hire their development team to work on my foundation's community projects. It would be steady work, well paid, but focused on affordable housing and community centers rather than luxury developments. The meeting lasted 2 hours. By the end, they'd agreed to my terms. Update 4. My sister showed up at my apartment the next evening, unannounced and visibly shaken. She'd heard about the business deal from her husband, though she clearly didn't understand all the details. She asked me directly why I'd never told the family about my success. I reminded her that she'd never actually asked about my work. She'd always seemed more interested in dismissing it than understanding it. She brought up the wedding, specifically her comments about my appearance and gift. I could see she was starting to piece together the implications of her behavior. I told her that the picture frame had actually been quite expensive. It was a custom piece made from reclaimed wood from our childhood home, which I'd purchased and had demolished the previous year. The photo inside was one of only 3 copies in existence, taken by a photographer who'd since become quite famous. The frame and photo together were worth more than her wedding dress. She asked why I'd let her and her friends mock me if I could have corrected them. I explained that I'd learned a long time ago that people reveal their true character when they think there are no consequences for their actions. She wanted to know if I was angry with her. I told her I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. There's a difference. The conversation lasted until nearly midnight. She apologized repeatedly, but I could tell she was more concerned about how this might affect her relationship with her new family than genuinely remorseful about her behavior. I told her that her husband's family would be fine. They'd have steady work with my foundation and could rebuild their reputation through actual charitable work instead of empty gestures. But their days of looking down on others were over. She asked what this meant for our relationship. I told her that was up to her. Final update. 6 months later, the Morrison Family Foundation had been dissolved and its remaining assets transferred to my organization. The family's former employees were now working on affordable housing projects and community technology centers. My sister's father-in-law had become one of my most dedicated project managers, apparently finding genuine satisfaction in work that actually helped people. My sister and I had dinner once a month now, usually at small restaurants where we could talk without pretense. She'd started volunteering at one of the community centers, teaching art classes to kids. She seemed happier, though she admitted it had taken time to adjust to a life where her value wasn't measured by her social connections or material possessions. The irony wasn't lost on me that in trying to teach them a lesson about humility, I'd accidentally created something genuinely meaningful. The foundation was thriving. The community programs were making a real difference, and even the Morrison family seemed to have found a sense of purpose they'd been missing. My sister asked me once if I'd planned it all from the beginning, if I'd known at the wedding that I would end up essentially taking over her husband's family business. I told her the truth. I'd only planned to make a point about treating people with respect regardless of their apparent circumstances. Everything else had just been good business. She laughed and said that was probably the most expensive lesson in manners anyone had ever received. I told her it was worth every penny. The real victory wasn't in proving my wealth or bringing down their empire. It was in watching people discover that their worth wasn't tied to their bank accounts or social status. My sister had learned to find value in helping others instead of impressing them. Her husband's family had found meaning in building communities instead of just building wealth. As for me, I'd learned that revenge served cold isn't nearly as satisfying as transformation served with purpose. The kid they'd mocked for his cheap shoes had taught them something money couldn't buy. That true success isn't about what you have, but what you do with it. And sometimes, the best way to win is to help everyone else win too.